Hey everybody, this is Christian Penguin 1990. My name is Matthew again. We're going to continue with some creation versus evolutionism. If you watched my last video, I covered the Big Bang or Big Dud. This one's going to be origin of the Earth. Now, of course, the creation side is that God spoke the Earth into existence, and it started off as water mostly, and then later on in the days of creation, He brought dry land, and that's how we got the granite and everything as well. The evolution side is that the Earth started off as a molten mass, and after millions of years of rain, it cooled down, and so on. First of all, I'm trying to figure out how it got enough moisture out of the molten mass to create the rain clouds in the first place, but that's beside the point. Anyway, so that's the two different sides, and some of the things that of course go against the evolution theory is what we're going to cover. One of the very first things that when I was doing my research, and I've got his book back there, is work by Robert Gentry, and he mostly is known as the go-to guy when it comes to polonium halos. Now these halos, the reason they're so important, and people try to dismiss them, they try to tell you to ignore it, is because their half-life is only 3 minutes, but yet there are literally trillions and trillions of them found everywhere inside granite, even in wood, and my apologies, and so on. And the half-life being 3 minutes is extremely important, which we'll go through later. But usually for the polonium halos, you'll have three different versions. You have polonium 218, polonium 214, and polonium 210. Okay, now as I mentioned earlier, there's trillions of these halos found in granite and in other rocks and everything else. So what does that go into? Granite didn't originate from gradual cooling, but instantly came into being in its present state, and it is believed that these halos help prove that, because with their half-life being so short, if it was to take millions and millions of years for them to cool down, the halos would have gone away, and you would have like probably uranium or something else showing up, but yet you still find these halos in granite. And Robert Gentry started looking at it really closely, and actually that's what caused him to go from being an evolutionist to a creationist, because he realized this actually disproves the molten mass theory. But yeah, so it showed him that this helps prove that it was instantaneous creation of granite during the days of creation, and not over millions of years of being cooled by liquid on the rocks. The rock formations came into existence within 3 minutes, and that goes back to the half-life. So, I forgot. Sorry. For those of you who are not used to science, or you haven't been in college in a while and so on, half-life is where after it reaches the halfway point, which in this case is 3 minutes, it loses half its material. So let's say it starts off with 200. At 3 minutes, it loses 100. At another 3 minutes, it loses 50. At another 3 minutes, it loses 25, and so on and so on. But supposedly, it never reaches absolute zero. But it just every 3 minutes with this half life, it would lose half of the material. And like carbon is supposed to be over 5,000 years. It loses half, and so on. So I'm sorry, I should explain that at the beginning. That's my fault. I apologize. But yeah, so with it being 3 minutes, that means that for them to be trapped and sealed in the granite, all the rocks that they're found in had to have been formed within the 3 minute time span. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there if it happened over millions of years. So that's the two things with the finding of the halos. So then he went into further research. Radio halo is the mark left around a particle of a radioactive substance by the radiation coming from that particle. So in other words, the polonium, as it deteriorates, it leaves a ring, leaves the halo ring, and so on. Thing number one that brought up with this: careful count shows trillions upon trillions in granite all over the world, not just in one spot, but everywhere. So if their half-life is only 3 minutes, and they said polonium 218 was 3 minutes, but they didn't. But I couldn't find the half-life of 242, 210. It made it sound like that all of them were about 3 minutes or less. So I'm not sure about those. I'll have to do some research, and when I find the update, I'll put it in the description below for you. But so if they're finding trains and trains of these halos all over the world, not in one spot, but all over the world, in all rock formations, even wood, as I'll go over later, and in granite, then that led him back to, well, it had to be instantaneous creation. It didn't take millions of years, because if it was millions of years, you wouldn't find any polonium halos. You might find other halos, but you probably most likely wouldn't find the polonium halos. Okay, number 2. Vast majority have no uranium-238 halos, making them primarily polonium halos and not daughter products. In other words, they didn't start off as uranium, and as it deteriorated, it became polonium, and then deteriorated, and then you got left with a polonium halo. So with them not finding any uranium-238 halos, but only the pure polonium halos, that means they're not daughter elements, which means nothing else caused them. They're pure polonium, and you can't say that another element caused them, or a mother element, however you want to call it. Primary polonium-218 halos are independent of radioactive parent. And that's another point that kind of goes along with number 2. In other words, since a parent radioactive element did not create them, they stand alone. And then you have to go back to the half-life of the 3 minutes. Well, if they stand alone and something else didn't create them in the 3 minutes, but for them to remain trapped in the rock and wood and so on, that means it had to be instantaneous. And like I said, each one goes back up. It just follows itself on the way. The half-life of the halos is only 3 minutes, which I've covered. Rock and granite in which they are found had to be solid at the time it was brought into existence for them to be trapped in it, which is what I was saying earlier. For it to be trapped within it, the rock had to be formed completely solid and trapped within 3 minutes. Otherwise, it would have escaped. The granite between the continents and magma means they weren't formed over millions of years. Now, that one I do want to cover a little bit. In other words, you have the surface, or the continents, and in between them is this granite layer, and below that is the liquid hot magma. Now, if the granite that they're pulling the granite, they study that granite, it has halos all in it, which is what Gentry discovered. And he's like, well, wait a minute, how could it have a half-life of 3 minutes, and it's between the continents and the magma? How then can we say that the magma and everything else is millions and millions of years old, when the granite that's between the two can only be 3 minutes old, with instantaneous creation and so on? And like I said, it just compounds itself. And he really went into, if you get his book, Creation's Tiny Mystery, look up Robert G. Gentry, I think is his middle initial. But Robert Gentry, Creation's Tiny Mystery, you can read the whole book yourself. He covers everything in it, from start to finish. And in the back, which is what I really liked about it, because like I said, I do have the book back there, and I've read it from cover to cover. In the very back of the book, he goes over all his notes, all his journal entries, and he was published in scientific journals, and everything that he did with this project to show why he believes what he believed with it and what it proved. So, but yeah, and that, to me, that really does go far into helping show that if the granite in between the continent and the magma has to be 3 minutes old, then why can't everything else be instantaneously created within that 3 minutes? And it really goes to show a younger Earth age. But like I said, there's a lot of this stuff that they don't want you to know about. Not all of them, because a lot of them, they just regurgitate what they're taught. And actually, there's a lot of them that are teachers that what they'll do is they're told you can't question, you can't bring into light anything else that might disprove it or might cause the children to question this theory. And a lot of them have their jobs have been threatened. Some have actually been fired. There's a lot of that that's been exposed lately. I know a lot of people don't like him, but he does have very good information. Kent Hovind talked about it briefly in a lot of his slides. He gave you numbers, and people, hey, call him and ask him if you don't believe me. And that's what I really liked about Hovind's presentations, is he gave you everything right there. It's like, hey, here's the guy's number. Feel free to call him, and he'll tell you all about it. There's some that they won't give you that information. They'll, like they just pulled it out of thin air. But he at least gave you all the stuff so you can backtrack it in the hopes that you would do your own research and see what he was talking about. But yeah, there's can't think of his name. Is it Ben Stein? I think did a movie called Expelled or something like that, where he tried to expose some of it as well, where the professors and so on were threatened with their jobs if they showed anything but evolution and so on. So it's not all of them, but there are a small number of them that they try their best to keep anything that might show proof for creation hidden. They don't want you to know it. So while I'm not trying to sound conspiracy theory or anything like that, which I know that's what that does sound like, but just so I just want you to know that yes, there is a small group. They are trying to control that information. They don't want you to know it. They want you to stay away from it. And like I said, there are others. In my state college that I went to, and I got my degree, and I'm going back to get another degree right now. I even ran across a professor who actually didn't care in my marine biology class, and he even said, "We're not going to say that because that's not proven." And it was something saying that it evolved this way. Where he said, "That's not been proven. I'm not going to teach that." So he told us to skip over that. That's not going to be on the test. That's not proven. But he's an evolutionist. I don't agree with that because it's not been proven. I'm not going to teach what hasn't been proven. Which question is, well, sir, the whole thing hasn't really been proven, so why you're still teaching it? But for a majority of his class, he actually never even said the word evolve or evolution because he just didn't believe in a lot of it that they put in that book. So for the textbook, and even if you're not a Christian or a creationist, we need more teachers that are willing to stand up and say, "Look, I'm not going to teach it. If I don't see there's proof of it, I'm not going to teach it." And that's all we need. And I'll cover more of that in the end of the video. Number 7. The alpha recoil technique proves that polonium-218 halos were definitely not caused by passing uranium or other radioactive solutions. Now, the reason... sorry, I'm still trying to fight this cold off. The reason that one was brought up is it was brought up at one point that, well, passing uranium or some other radioactive solution caused the polonium halo. That's why it's there. Well, they did extensive study. Like I said, Robert Gentry is considered the leading expert in the polonium halos. He did extensive study on them. It didn't happen. There's no way that the passing elements could have done it. Number 8. Granite is original in its present form and should be classified as primordial or Genesis rock. Which, of course, that's because of the 3-minute half-life and so on. And Genesis rock, of course, Genesis creation. I mean, that's pretty much self-explanatory where they're going with that one. Granite with its large crystals cannot be made from any molten rock, including molten granite. So in other words, when granite is melted and then cooled, because it always forms rhyolite or rhyolite, however you want to say it. Every time they've done this test where they've melted it down, when it reforms, as it cools, it actually reforms into a complete other material called rhyolite. It never forms back into granite. So again, that disproves the molten mass cooling down and there's your granite because, like I said, with the test, the granite formed rhyolite. It didn't form granite when it cooled down. So that disproved itself. The polonium halos have never been reproduced in a lab. And with that, Robert Gentry, people said, well, there's a natural reason why they happen and so on. He said, okay, well, here's your thing. Make granite in the lab, get these halos to last, and I will concede. Never been done. To my knowledge, I've kept the track on it. When I did this research, I double checked. It's never been done. They've never made the granite. They've never shown how naturally the polonium halos could get there. And his challenge still stands. And even in his book, he talks about the challenge. He said, hey, just make the granite and prove to me, and then I'll concede. And they haven't done it yet. So he's not going to concede. But I'll cover more on Gentry in a minute at the end of the video. Lab tests are usually made on what is known as mica or mica in granite. Fluorite also has the polonium halos. Fluorite is also totally solid. So again, even in the fluorite, you find the halos. And fluorite's solid, so it's been trapped in there, and it still has the same half-life and everything else. Number 12. The ring structure of polonium halos is different from the ring structure of uranium chain halos, which goes back to showing they were not a daughter element of uranium or other radioactive substances. They are standalone. And like I said, all this goes back to, on top of itself, showing why polonium halos are so important and why they're not getting the scientific news that they deserve. Like I said, it's because that small group wants to keep evidence for the creation side hidden. They don't want you to know it. Excuse me. Polonium-210 halos in wood. Now remember earlier I said it's been found in wood. Well, we're going to cover that now. It's polonium-210 halos, by the way, that was covered in wood. Only polonium-210 is found within coalified, wood. In other words, wood has been petrified and so on. They're finding polonium halos in the wood. So, which, I'll cover that in a brief second as to what that means. This reveals that rapid deposition of the wood during a flood occurred. In other words, once it got in the wood was rapidly covered up and fossilized, which is what Christian is saying is how the fossils. I am so sorry about this cough and everything. I'm trying to fight it off with medicine. But that's what Christian is saying, how fossils form. And even evolutionists have to admit that fossils are formed by being covered very quickly and being left alone to fossilize within 48 hours, which has been done in lab tests. Stuff can fossilize and become a fossil within 48-hour time period. It doesn't take millions of years to happen. It can be done in 48 hours. So that's why they're saying, well, hey, if these got trapped during the flood, that would explain them. How they got trapped in there when it fossilized and became rockish. That's how they got trapped. Was during the flood. Elliptical polonium-210 halos reveal rapid covering occurred. So in other words, the elliptices of the halo itself helps prove rapid covering, which of course come from the sediment because of the flood, which most rock we have around us today is sedimentary rock, and if it gets wet enough it becomes mud and mush and so on. Number 4, the existence of double polonium-210 halos, this is important, reveals rapid formation of rock strata above the coalified wood. So in other words, when you have doubles, then the sediment, like I was talking about, it got muddy and it covered it up really quick. Well, if you have the halos touching, where the wood is and the strata is, then that means it got covered really quickly, and that helped prove that, according to that side. I have to do more research on that to fully understand why they think that, but just for now, that's the notes on that one. Number 5. Wood samples came from 3 different geological strata layers. This brings firm evidence for the flood. So in other words, they took it from this layer, and this layer, and all of them had the same thing. They had the polonium-210 halos, they had the double halos, and all of this goes back to, they said, well, the only possible way this could have happened, if you really look at the work and everything and the study of it, they said the only way this could have occurred is by being covered very quickly due to a global flood, being that it was covered the whole earth. And I'll cover the flood by itself in another video, and so on. And they say that's what helps prove that there was a flood. This is just one of the proofs that they give as proof for the flood. Now we're going to go away from the polonium halos, and we're going to go into helium, which is something else actually that Robert Gentry covers in his book. Sorry, I'm trying to fight off these coughs as long as possible so I can get this video to you. And he started doing some study with the zircon crystals. And what he found was there's a bunch of helium in the zircon crystals. And here's number 1 is why this means. The analysis of the zircon crystals from different levels, which what they did is they dug 15,000 feet down a hole, and they took zircon crystals from different levels all the way down. Revealed no increase of lead escape had occurred. Satan really doesn't want me to get y'all this information to you. This is consistent with the biblical age of the earth, meaning less than 10,000 years old. Like I said in my introduction video, I added up all the dates and everything, and I got just over 7,000 years, not 6,000 years. And a lot of people base that off of I think it was a bishop or somebody said that the earth was 4,004 years old at 6 a.m. something like that. And I don't believe the 4,000 BC thing, but I do think that the earth is older than 6,000 years, but probably no older than 8,000 years. Give between 6 and 8,000 is if what I got when I did the dates in the Bible. Okay, number 2. Helium has a high retention at 197 degrees centigrade or 386.6 degrees Fahrenheit. What that means is if Earth was millions of years old, the helium should have totally escaped. But instead it's there, it's still in the crystals, and when they tested it, they actually dated the helium. The helium date matched biblical creation. It did not match the geological column, which by the way was totally made up out of the thin blue air because they didn't have any of the dating methods, which I will go over in a later video why they're wrong on different levels. And so, but Lyle and his buddies made up all the dates out of thin air just because they were atheistic. They wanted to get control of the sciences and so on. And it's really funny how at the beginning with evolution and all this, during the times of Darwin, it was actually the church, the Roman Catholic Church, let me correct myself, not all churches, the Roman Catholic Church, that actually spearheaded this and got it pushed in. And actually the scientists were the ones that were saying, no, this is the most ridiculous thing we've ever heard. There's no way you can scientifically prove this, therefore it's not science, and they left it alone. And a lot of scientists at the time actually didn't even bring scripture into anything or, saying, see, this proves creation. They left that out. It was just pure science. They didn't hold to either side. But today, it's a battle. And it's a battle because, like I said, the small group wants to have total control, and they've tricked and indoctrinated people into the moment you hear somebody's a creationist, the first things always that come out of your mouth. And I'm not lying. It happens almost all the time. About 98% of the time, I'll have somebody immediately, out of nowhere, without even thinking, they'll say, you're uneducated, and you don't know what you're talking about, and you can't be a scientist. And I asked why. And they said, well, I don't know. That's just what we were taught. I was like, okay, how does me being a creationist keep me from being a scientist? The fact that I'm a creationist does not keep me from being a scientist. It just means I have a different scientific view than you do. However, I still use the same formulas. I use the same calculations. The only difference between a biblical creationist and an evolutionist is this: age of the earth and the universe, and how biological life forms got here. That's it. Literally, that's it. That's the two. But yet, because we differ on those two views, they want you to believe I'm uneducated and that I can't be a scientist. And it's total straw man. They just don't want you to listen. And a true scientist should do this. He should approach something and hear both sides. And then like, okay, what does the scientific evidence lean towards? And the thing is, and another thing that Hovind did, which I really like how he put it, he said you have the fact column, you have creationist side, and you have the evolutionary side. And what happens, this being the evolutionary side, they want to erase that line and make them part of the facts. And they want you to think that the creation side is just religious nonsense, when it's not. They're both religious, and that you have to believe one of them. And I've actually talked to a few people that they believe in evolution, but they told me straightforward, yeah, it's a belief. There's no actual fact behind it, but I choose to believe it. I'm like, so many people, they want to argue that it's fact, and here's people that believe in evolution, and they straight out said, yes, it's just a belief. There's no actual fact behind it, but it's what they choose to believe. And like I said, that's their choice. I'm not mocking them for it. I'm just letting you know what some people have told me. And it did shock me because so many people, well, how can you, fight what's a fact? And like I said, we're going through all that. Why? But, and so on. Okay. I got off on a tangent again. I'm sorry. Where was I? I did helium. Oh, yeah. If the Earth was millions of years old, all the helium would have escaped by now. But they're still finding tons of helium in a lot of the zircon crystals, which when they dated the helium itself, it matched up with biblical creation when they dated. Let me cover zircon crystals by themselves for a second. Like I said, I'm sorry with these coughs. I did some research on zircon crystals. And a lot of people said, well, there's no leaching, that's why we use them. And they prove a perfect billions of years old, that's why we use them. So, and I was like, okay, well, let me look into it. The article I found, which was a CNN article, if I remember correctly, the guy who did this study, I think he was actually the one who discovered them, something like that. And he did the study from the ones in Australia. He openly admitted that you could see the lead moving inside the crystal. And I think in several situations, he said you actually see the lead go in and out of the crystal. That's called leaching, which means if you just openly admitted that, you have a contaminated item. You can't use it for anything. It's contaminated. And because if you are literally watching the lead move inside and move around or move in and out of the crystal, that means other lead could have moved in and out and changed the date by adding more lead than what was supposed to be there. And a lot of them, what they do, and some say, well, they count for that. I said, actually, no, they don't. They just count. Because it takes too long for them to actually go through and try to figure out what lead is supposed to be there and what's not. And from what I understood of everything I read that he did while in Australia, is he took a total of, I can't remember if it was 104 or 140, but I know there was 104 in there somewhere. But I want to say it was 140. Over 140 samples of zircon crystals, dated every single one. Out of 140, he used the dates from only 3. Now that brought to me a very big red flag. I'm like, well, if they all prove the date that you want to go with, which is billions of years, then why did you only use the date for 3? And what I was able to dig up was that he got ranging dates from all of them, from thousands of years to millions of years to the billions of years, which was the 3 he used, because it matched up with the geologic column and the age of the Earth that they were trying to say, like the 4.6 billion years and so on. And that goes back to what I said. You have this group that if it does not match the theory or match the geologic column, date-wise or anything else, they hush it, they try to hide it. And, of course, that goes back to what I was talking about. And the reason I brought up lead is for this reason. The lead 206 and 207 ratio is way too high in the zircon crystals when they checked them. And that goes back to what I said when the guy actually admitted you could see the lead moving around in it and moving in and out of it. You just openly told everybody leaching was occurring, and yet you tested it anyway. And you gave a date from a contaminated item. You can't do that. That is unscientific. It's wrong. And they know it's wrong, but they're not going to tell you that. They're just going to tell you, hey, we got this that proves our dates. They're not going to tell you everything else about it. So, and like I said, a lot of my resources I like to go to mainly for the creation side is I like to go to the Institute for Creation Research at ICR.org. I'll put the link in one of my other videos. And I like them because they try to show both sides, and then they go through and like, well, here, if you look at scientifically, here's, what's going on with it. And when it comes to the helium, they actually have multiple articles, which I'll tell you what, when I get done with all these videos, I will pull those out because I did print them off to read them. I'll pull off their entries on those, and I think it was Russell Humphreys and several others. And a guy actually came out and said that, well, they're wrong, and he never really gave why they were wrong. He just said, well, they're wrong, and he went on a long-winded, thing through an article he posted, but he never explained what they did wrong, how they calculated wrong, or anything. He just said that they did it wrong. And see, then that goes back to what a lot of other creationists are saying. Well, what they're doing is they give this overall answer like, well, they're wrong. Okay, well, how are they wrong? Well, they just are. Like, okay, what calculation did they do wrong? Did they have a minus instead of a plus? I mean, what did they do wrong? And they'll never give an answer because they can't give an answer, in all honesty. And so they'll give these broad answers. Well, all the stuff they're using as proof for their side has been, debunked a long time ago. And I talked to somebody that said that, and I said, okay, well, what was debunked? Well, all of it. I was like, okay, what specifically was debunked so I can go look at it? Well, it was just all debunked. And they would never give a specific answer. And whenever someone gives a broad answer and not a specific one, it's somebody that they're just saying it. They have no proof behind why they said it. But, so hopefully this helped with the origin of the Earth and a little bit of the age of the Earth, which we will actually cover more in depth in the next video. And now on to what I said I was going to cover a little bit with a lot of this stuff. And the like I said, the zircon crystals, they're being used as the oldest crystals, but like I said, they're not going to tell you everything. They're not going to tell you all the dates. And to me, if I was a scientist, this is how I would do it. Honestly, even being a biblical creationist, this is what I would do. If I took something and I dated it, okay, I date it. I got multiple items I date. Let's say they were not contaminated. For some strange reason, they were actually not contaminated. So I date them. I get from 1,000 years to 250,000 years. When I do my report and my journal entry for them to look at my research, I will post, here's the dates. But here's what happens. People that print it off for the journals change it to match the geologic column. And they've actually had a few of them that have come out and said, hey, that's not the dates we gave you, several times in the past. And that's where I found out about that. And it did shock me. It really did. I was sitting there, I was like, well, because a long time the radiometric dating methods and so on, that did confuse me for a while. But the more I looked into it, I was like, they're covering up these dates. They don't want you to know they're getting varying dates and so on. So, like I said, we're going to cover the dating methods in a whole nother video. We're going to cover the flood in a whole nother video by itself, with scripture and with scientific evidence that there was a flood. But briefly, I will touch on it in this video. The problem I have with this is I've actually had people on the evolutionary side come to me and say, can you imagine that a flood caused the canyons on Mars when there's hardly any water on Mars whatsoever? I know people, like, well, there's some at the ice caps. I was like, well, yeah, but it's frozen, but it's not enough to cover Mars and cause a flood like that. But yet here we are on a planet that almost 70% of it is covered in water, and yet they can't understand where the water came from for the flood or where it went. I'm like, the ocean. And that's the other thing where, believe it or not, creationists and evolutionists actually sort of agree. They just have a different way of going about it. That there was actually way more land than there was water at one point. Now, to try and go back to helping disprove the flood, they came up with Pangea, and that different seismic earthquakes and so on separated, and the continents formed and separated that way. But see, that's their assumption that the ocean, the waters for the ocean, had always been there, and there was just this one landmass, and then it separated. Well, what if there was a huge landmass and very little water, and the flood then covered the earth, and where it split up in the Atlantic Trench and the Pacific Trench, where the fissures are, that caused the continents to start to move apart, which of course would then, as they hit, they would form the mountains. Like Mount Everest was not always as tall as it is. It happened during the flood and so on. So, like I said, I will cover all those more in detail in later videos. And I hope these videos are helping y'all when it comes to creation versus evolutionism. And the Why Pray is also bringing y'all some spiritual support and well-being. And I will end that video here, guys, and I will see you next time, and may God bless, and may you have a happy week, and always be blessed in everything you do. See y'all then, and God bless.